Hi everyone that is with us this morning. It's lovely to have you here. My name is Andrea Davis. I am one of the account managers at the Civil Service College, and I'll be with you for the next hour for our International Women's Day webinar, Break Biases to Lead Differently, a New Era of Leadership. And I am joined by our lead facilitator, Meenakshi Mistry, who is our Associate Director for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. And our panelists, Catherine Seddon, who we have here, and Ritika Wadwa, who is going to be with you for the next hour. This is a panel discussion, but we want to hear from you. We want lots of questions, lots of engagement. We want to promote a lot of conversation in the chat box. So please use that chat box throughout. We'll try and get through as many questions as possible. But just quickly for some housekeeping rules, if everyone could kindly keep their microphones off and cameras off, that would be, cameras off, that would be fantastic. It's just to avoid any background noise. Again, we want lots of questions throughout the session, so please do use that chat box. And I guess we'll get going. What I'd like to do is just to give you a bit of history about International Women's Day first of all. International Women's Day takes place every year on March the 8th to celebrate the achievements of women all over the world. This global social movement actually dates back to 1908 in New York City, which started with a protest where women went out onto the streets to demand the right to vote for shorter working hours and better pay. Since then, it has taken many different forms, and today is a global event that is supported by charities, NGOs, governments and academic institutions across the world. It is a day for celebrating the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women and marks a call to action for accelerating gender parity. All International Women's Day events are designed to celebrate the role of women in society and to make us all take a step back and think about the progress that has been made, but also about the changes that still need to take place to ensure the world is a fair and equal place for all. I'd like to hand it over now to my colleague Meenakshi Mistry, who again is our Associate Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at Civil Service College, to take the platform. So over to you, Meenakshi.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for that lovely welcome, and good morning all, and welcome to this very special webinar on breaking bias to lead differently, a new era of leadership, as we celebrate International Women's Day 2022. So welcome all. As Andrea says, I'm Meenakshi Mistry, your host for the next hour, Associate Director for ED&I here at the Civil Service College. I think before we commence this webinar, could we firstly just take a moment to reflect on the tragic situation which is happening in Ukraine, and let us pray for the many men, women and children who are now embroiled in this military aggression, and our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Ukraine. I just wanted to take a moment just to think about the many people who are going through an extremely, extremely difficult time. It's great to have you here today as we celebrate International Women's Day, a global day celebrating social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women worldwide. Today also marks a call to action for accelerating gender parity. And as we continue to imagine what a gender equal world looks like, which is free from discrimination, biases and stereotypes, we want to live in a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Now, over the next 60 minutes, our panelists will be sharing their stories, experiences, and perspectives to educate and empower other women to follow. They have been role modeling this new era of leadership capabilities needed to drive cultures of belonging. They have been transforming leadership to break biases, disrupting status quo, and showcasing how to drive change by crafting spaces for diverse voices, equitable outcomes, and then creating an inclusive future. Today, you'll have the opportunity to learn how to navigate your ways to craft better opportunities for a balanced representation, how to center voices to break the silence and use your platform of privilege to enable impactful change, and how to champion success in all its forms by navigating through challenges and changing the narrative to come out on top. And so joining me today is Catherine Seddon. Catherine is currently the Senior Independent Director for the Gambling Commission. And as Commissioner, she sits on the Commission's Remuneration Committee, its 4th National Lottery Committee, and its change programme, Reset. Catherine brings 13 years of NED experience with national regulators in 4 different government departments. Her particular interests include strategy, governance, risk management, and regulatory decision making. And also joining Catherine is Ritika Wadwa, Director for UK Operations at the Cultural Intelligence Centre. Ritika is on a mission to bring inclusion and innovation right to the heart of organisations. She believes that cultural intelligence, which we also refer to as CQ, is the one powerful capability which can help organisations and their people to work more effectively in culturally diverse situations. Ritika was born and brought up in India in a patriarchal society and not permitted to work because of her gender. She went on to achieve an MBA from a university in the UK and broke all barriers as a first-generation immigrant to Canada in her family. So welcome both Catherine and Ritika.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks, Meenakshi.
Wonderful. Have we all got sound? Is everyone can hear me? Yes? Perfect. So, Catherine, if I may come over to you first, if we can talk about transformational leadership. Catherine, after 20 years as an award-winning documentary filmmaker for the BBC and running your own production company, you had a career change. How did you reinvent yourself?
It's a good question, Meenakshi. I went straight into the BBC as a graduate trainee producer. So I hadn't known any other world other than television and television production for 20 years. And to put it bluntly, I had a set of personal circumstances about that time, which meant that I needed a change of direction. So as many people would realise, television, certainly at the high level documentary making end, is a very all-consuming activity, which I loved, and I had great fulfillment doing it, but it wasn't compatible with a good, what I would call a good work-life balance. And I was a single parent with 2 children at that time, one of whom was multiply disabled. And to cut a long story short, he was in and out of intensive care. At the time, I was running my own production company, and I clearly needed something that would give me more autonomy, more flexibility about exactly how I worked and when I worked. So I needed something that was going to be completely outside the world of television. And it wasn't immediately obvious to me what that should be. At that time, by that time, I'd been volunteering in the community as well as working in television. I've been volunteering in the community as a magistrate. And I'd been chairing as a magistrate in central London courts. And one day, one of my colleagues on the bench said to me, you know, you're pretty good at this judicial decision making. Have you ever thought about applying for paid judicial roles? And I said, surely there aren't paid judicial roles for anyone who hasn't got a legal background. And that was when the world of the tribunal service opened up to me. And as soon as I looked at this wonderful array of 71 tribunals, many of which do recruit what they call specialist lay members, I suddenly thought more broadly about some of the skills and knowledge that I'd acquired outside television. One of which was, as a result of my disabled child, quite a lot of skills and knowledge about disability and about impact on family and sibling of disability. And so I was looking at the tribunal service. I was thinking about this experience that I'd acquired through my son's disability. And I thought, do you know, I think I could apply to be a specialist lay member sitting on social security tribunals, making decisions about disability living allowance, disability benefits. So I applied for that, and I got it. And then I started thinking more laterally about other tribunals, at which point somebody said, are you interested in applying for employment tribunal? And I thought, well, actually, I've been running my own company for 10 years. I didn't think of it as doing anything other than making television on my own terms, but I had been doing that. And so I applied as an employer member of employment tribunal, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, I thought, well, that's great, the tribunal service, but I do need something else. So I started looking through the Sunday Times appointment pages like other people would. And I came across something called a non-executive director. I sat on as a trustee of charities, but I never sat on a board. I'd never sat on a national board. And I read through the description of what a non-exec director did. And it was for a national regulator which was really interesting to me, about whose work I really cared. And I put together the fact that I was really interested in the work. I had quite some general knowledge about it. And looking at the description of a non-exec director, I thought, do you know, I think if I put in enough work and I hone my skills, I can apply for that. So I did apply for it. I was extremely lucky to meet a really inspirational chair, happened to be a woman, might well have been a man, but it happened to be a woman, who at that time was doing something that was reasonably unusual within the public sector. And that was that she was championing expanding the diversity of her board. She said, I really want different voices, different backgrounds. I don't want people who have been non-exec directors in 5 other bodies who are going to do things in a very traditional way. I want people to bring new ideas. And so, you know, to cut a long story short, she gave me a chance. And I then really enjoyed sitting on a national board. And from there, I could move into applying for other national boards and building up what I now have, which is a broad public sector portfolio. And once I'd got that broad public sector portfolio, a number of people would say to me when they discovered that I used to work in television, they would say, gosh, what you're doing now is so radically different from what you did as a television producer and director. And if you look at skills in terms of very job specific requirements, that may be true. So the job specific description of what I did in television was that I directed film, I directed tape, I cut material in the cutting room, I made difficult editorial and ethical decisions, I produced contributors, I interviewed extensively, I wrote scripts and storyboards and commentaries. You know, I did a whole variety of what one might call job-specific things or skills. But there's another way of spinning those same skills, which is to look at them more generically. And if you look at them more generically, you come up with problem solver in a variety of difficult immediate situations. You come up with extensive and experienced researcher. You come up with somebody who's got a broad and multifarious communication skill set. You come up with somebody who's got what, if you're polite, you might call a can-do attitude. If you're less polite, you might call a sort of bloody-minded tenacity. And a determination that once you have a goal for what you want to achieve, you know, in my case, what I would put out on screen, you are going to make it happen. You know, come what may, you're going to adapt your ideas and make it happen. So you've got intellectual flexibility. And fundamentally, coming from a public service broadcaster, you've got a really strong sense of ethical responsibility. Now, if you look, as I say, at those as generic skill set, then actually you can apply that skill set as much to any of the roles that I now adopt in the public sector, including teaching at the Civil Service College, including lecturing, including coaching and mentoring, you know, as you can and as I did apply to the world of television. So I think the two big lessons to draw from that are, first, when you're thinking about a change of direction, don't restrict your assessment of your skill set to what you've done as the day job, because you will find that there are all sorts of experiences and really valuable skills that come from other parts of your life. And the second thing is always gauge your own worth in terms of the generic skills that you have, rather than something that is very narrowly specific to a single job.
Thank you, Catherine. It was thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for sharing your journey with us. And there's something that I'd like to come back to you on around. You spoke about your inspirational chair, who is a woman, but let's talk about that in a moment. I'm going to come over to Ritika next. Hi, Ritika. Welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Meenakshi. Hi, welcome everybody.
Hi there. Thanks for joining us today, Ritika. I want us to talk about your personal journey. You know, as a woman of color, an immigrant, breaking biases. You've been doing that for, you know, many years. How are you now using your platform of privilege and putting it to work to enable others opportunities that may not exist otherwise? And perhaps you can share today with us, you know, your journey to where you are today and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you, Meenakshi. I absolutely enjoyed listening to Catherine's story. Very insightful and very inspiring. So talk about bias. Being born as a girl in India from day one, the wider family would not accept me because I was a girl, and it was a letdown for my grandmother. So really, bias began from the day I was born, and all the way in my life, it was always, even if I got I was the only one to get a job offer from my college cohort. My family said, well, here's a blank check. You don't need to work. You don't need to bring shame upon our family by working. It was pretty much, you know, it was that. So I had to defy the law, the rule of the society, the family, the community to even step into an office and work. And work really went beyond ambition for me. It was freedom. Ambition translated into financial freedom, emotional freedom. And so the biases I faced working as a woman in India, it very much sort of honed in that job security meant more than anything else. So I never really sat down and thought about what I really wanted to do. It was always, this is one job, you finish that job or whatever else happens and you move on to another job. And what that also meant was I moved to the UK to do my MBA. And suddenly I was very different. Although being born and brought up as a woman in India, I still sort of belonged, fitted in a way. But when I moved to the UK, I realized I had an accent. That was new. And I never looked, never even considered how my V's and W's roll. And suddenly that became an issue. The first job interview I had in the UK, the prospective employer looked at my name on the CV and said, well, we need to talk to her on the phone first to even figure out if we can understand her. So, you know, that's the sort of bias based on just my name and the fact that I had come from India. So, you know, that was the first interview on the phone to understand my accent, to understand whether I was able to speak in English. And there was, you know, all along the way, several biases. Again, you know, you don't consider it a big deal in your 20s and 30s because you just want to get on with it. You want to put your head down. As an Asian, as an immigrant, I just wanted to put my head down, work hard, get on with it. And so I rolled in Canada, in the UK, from one job to the next. Business development, marketing, retention, client retention. I've done it all in the last 25 years without ever thinking whether I wanted to do it. And ever realizing the amount of bias I faced in each role. You know, I've had men scrunch up paper and throw it at me when I asked for a project report. I've had the hand when I'm speaking mid-sentence. I've been bullied, discriminated, which I never really thought was bullying or discrimination while I was going through it. And this is why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And really how I got to here was the pandemic. I was on a call and I have a photograph. That was a life-changing moment. I have a photograph of that call where literally everybody on that call looked exactly the same, except me. I was starkly different in gender, in age, in color, in everything. And my perspective was so different and not welcome. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't spend the next 25 years of my life rolling from one job to the next for the sake of job security. So I went down the road of hiring a career coach and really gave it my all for 6 months. My challenge to my coach was, find me what I'm passionate about, find me what I'm good at, and make sure that I get a job that I don't have to compromise on my salary, because I worked damn hard to get to where I have. So I'm not going backwards. But equally, I want to do something that calls me. That's my purpose. So we spent 6 months, 6 very, very hard months, very painful months going through that journey. At the end of that, cut a long story short, transformational leadership and DEI came out as my passion, diversity, equity, inclusion, really because the lived experiences were so powerful, so painful. I wanted to pave the way for others that don't have to go through what I've gone through. And I had no experience in DEI. So to Catherine's point, there were so many transferable skills. It was a matter of my coach working with me, and you don't even need a coach, possibly, depending on where you're in your journey. It became a skills-based CV rather than an experience-based CV. And so on the basis of that skills-based CV and on the basis of my passion and purpose that was unraveled, I had 4 job offers in 2 months. That right there is proof of the
That's
pudding.
amazing.
You put your heart, your purpose comes through in the interview. And, those 4 job offers meant the world because they were all DEI related leadership roles. And I decided to go for cultural intelligence because really within the DEI space and transformational leadership space, I saw that CQ was the only tool that was research based, tangible assessment of making people accountable to change. There's IQ, there's EQ, and then there's CQ. How we behave with people that are different from us is 100% dependent on our capability, which is CQ and can be developed. There's assessments, there's a whole, I could go on. So, I mean, CQ was my calling through the job process. And it is unbelievable. I look back at it even last week, and I was fired from one role many years ago because I wasn't hitting my numbers. As the director of UK operations for the Cultural Intelligence Centre, I have been given a target, an annual target. I've hit half of it in month 2.
Amazing.
Again,
congratulations.
Proof in the pudding, proof in the pudding. I'm doing this because I believe this is my purpose. This is where the market's calling for it. So, this is me. I haven't changed. My experience hasn't changed. My skills based hasn't changed. But what's changed is that I found my purpose. What's changed is I believe in what I'm doing. What's changed is I'm so confident of my difference, the unique perspective that I bring to the table because of my lived experiences and differences is what is making me successful. I'm not covering anymore. And so, Meenakshi, you and I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and you said, we are in a position of privilege. I had to sit back for a second and think, what? We all have privilege. That's a given. We all have privilege. But because of the color of my skin, because of my gender, I never, ever looked at myself as someone that people would want to listen to, or that I came from a position where I had the capability to inspire others. I just, when you said privilege, I just had to sit back and breathe really hard, because what does privilege mean for women like me? And I have thought about it so hard since we talked about it. And you're right. The position of privilege, what that means to me genuinely is authentic leadership. So what I do as a woman is I show up as who I am, compassionate, empathetic, authentic, because I've had the problems with childcare, I've had problems with maternity leave, I've had the issue of working in rooms and spaces where I was the only one that looked like me. And so being the voice in a way for people that look like me, or even for people that want to be allies and understand what our lived experiences were and where we are because of them, I'm happy to be that voice. I'm happy to be vulnerable and put that risk out there of being vulnerable at the cost of inspiring even one person to carry on that path, to not give up, to believe genuinely that your unique differences is your biggest asset. So here
thank
we are.
you, Tika. Thank you so much for sharing that. And actually, we are in this era of women breaking biases and women shaping this new era of leadership and that authentic leadership. And I just want to come back to that point in a moment. Catherine, may I just come back to you? You spoke about you had somebody really inspirational in your life, and it was a woman. And women need to carry women. Can you just share a little bit more with our audience today how this inspirational woman supported you? Just give us an example.
Well, I think first I just want to say that I found what Ritika said really humbling, actually, really humbling. And I think that, the key takeaway for me is a recognition of each other's vulnerabilities, no matter what our background. I don't just mean women. And recognizing that whenever one goes into a workplace, actually, contrary to appearances, everyone, including many of the men around a board table, also have those vulnerabilities. And actually what we're talking about is the true sense of inclusion, which is a recognition of the worth of everyone in a workplace, rather than considering that some are privileged and some are less privileged or weaker. So yeah, just wanted to say that first. In terms of role models, the person that I mentioned, and actually she was a real inspiration to me, but by no means the only one. And I can number at least 4 in my career, including within television, all of whom have given me an inspiration, have given me a real sense of encouragement and a real sense of fighting what has been an issue for me for many years of my life, and I suspect other women too, which is commonly called imposter syndrome. The idea that I described it even, I remember, in what I was saying to you right at the beginning, in terms of, a stroke of luck, I was given a chance. That tends to be a stereotypically female way of characterizing being in the right place at the right time. And I suppose what these role models collectively have made me realize is that, yes, there can be an element of luck in all careers. And that's important, and it's important to recognize. But what that luck is being given the opportunity to present and to shine and to show of your true worth in front of someone who's open to it. In other words, my meeting that woman on the first application that I made to sit on a national board in the public sector, certainly it required her to be open to the idea of putting someone onto her board who had no previous national board experience and who had no knowledge of governance and how one goes about strategy development and all the rest of it, but who had something in her passion and her background and the skill set that she could offer, which this role model saw could be adapted and bring real value to the board she wanted to create. And that's the point that I really want to stress, that being in the right place at the right time is about the opportunity to show of your best and having the recognition from somebody you admire that you are good enough to do this. It's not, okay, I'll give you a chance because I'm nice. It's, I'm giving you a chance because I truly believe that you will add value. And it's the affirmation, the confidence of role models conveying that to you, which changes your inner impression and therefore enables you to move from strength to strength and to move from something which can appear truly beyond your own capabilities into something which you own and which you mold and to which you bring a difference, and then move on to something else.
Thank you, Catherine, for that. And yes, I agree. It was, you had an inspirational woman who supported you, and, the opportunities and being in the right place at the right time. But also it's a testament to what you believed in, what you could achieve, and the hard work that went behind achieving and, breaking that glass ceiling, could I say? And I think you have smashed that glass ceiling. And I think you're a fine example for all of us to kind of follow in your footsteps. So thank you for sharing that. Ritika, if I can just come back to you, we spoke about privilege and we spoke about authentic leadership. This new era of leadership where women are smashing it out, right? Really smashing it out now. Can you give us an example, in your role as director at CQ here in the UK, how are you leading differently?
Great question, Meenakshi. And I want to start off with, are we really smashing it? Are we really been given all the opportunities there are for the taking to smash it? That photograph of all those white men sitting around the table at that conference in Munich broke my heart. 2022, not a single woman, let alone a person of color, in that room in 2022. So are we really smashing it is the question to you and the audience. We are such a long way away, such a long way away. We've only just scratched the surface. But God knows that the opportunities that we do manage to grab and get, yes, we absolutely smash it. So how I'm leading differently is through authentic leadership. There's a big risk. The organizations are constantly questioning you bringing your whole self to work. What does that mean? And how genuine you are, and what sort of an example does that lead for everyone? What is the risk of doing that? And again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm happy to take that risk because stories are so inspiring. Literally, when you sit in a room full of people that even look exactly the same, they've all had such different experiences. And just listening to those stories and hearing those experiences, the more that leaders can share those experiences, the more transparent they can be, the more the humanity that they can show. There's someone in the chat that's mentioned all the women that are high up in their organization are not very personable. And, I get that. I think that's what needs to change, where people need to show up as humans to the workplace, warts and all, problems and all. I'm mentoring someone in BT right now, and he said, oh my God, I can't even dare to show that I'm stressed about this project because God knows that's going to be used against me. And that's just so sad. That's just so sad because, especially for people of color, where they make the smallest mistake, it's held against them in an organization in such a wrong way that they don't feel they can bring their whole self to work. So my question back to my mentor is, we have to start from somewhere. We really need to start with somewhere. It starts with us. We as leaders, managers, wherever we are and whatever authority we have in that space, need to show up as authentic leaders, compassionate, empathetic, and that's what I'm doing different. So I'm on LinkedIn if people want to follow me. I'm very honest on my post. I'm very raw about what's going on in my life and how that's affecting how I lead the CQ work in the UK and my teams. And, for the one troll I get, there's 100 inspiring messages about I was just ready to give up. I just didn't think that this was my path. And I saw your message and I think, okay, I think it's worth carrying on. So that's the difference.
Thank you, Ritika, for that. And, when we talk about authentic leadership, it's actually also okay to be an imperfect leader. We are not expecting our leaders to come into work every day and be perfect. We want them to come in with care, commitment, and compassion, and to understand our differences and to understand where we are coming from. If we could just move on to my next question about gender biases. You know, there are many examples of gender bias, both conscious and unconscious, and it impacts women in different ways. A question to you both: how are you leading differently to break some of those biases, and how is it playing out for you currently in your roles? Is there any examples that you might want to share?
Maybe I can come in on that one, actually. I think fundamental for me is really shouting from the rooftops the evidence for what diversity delivers. There are some people who think that the campaign for EDI is just some form of political correctness. There is now a wealth of evidence showing that really meaningful diversity actually produces enormous commercial benefits. And not just enormous commercial benefits, but enormous benefits in terms of organizational cohesion, staff satisfaction, staff well-being, reduction in turnover, you know, huge benefits throughout. And I think that one cannot underestimate the degree to which we all need to continue to champion that in order to counter this recurrent theme, especially from the most biased and prejudiced and stereotypical, who say that all of this is just about PC gone mad. And, you know, what's wrong with the status quo because we were delivering perfectly fine. And I just wanted to quote a couple of the people that I've found very inspirational in my own reading, but also in some of the courses that I teach for the Civil Service College. There's a truly inspirational woman called Dambisa Moyo. She's an economist, a Black economist, featured in 2021's Time magazine Top 100 Most Influential People. And she's written many really interesting books, but one of them was How Boards Work, because she has extensive experience of sitting on a number of high-profile private sector boards as well as some public sector boards. And what she said was, boards need to be more knowledgeable, more transparent, more diverse, and more deeply involved in setting the strategic course of the companies they lead. And I think that that's about recognizing that unless you have at the leadership of all organizations a truly diverse set of people, you are unlikely to be able to harness the benefit of a wide variety of thoughts and a wide variety of initiatives. And I just wanted to build on something that Ritika said. I think it's really important that we don't restrict our conversation about diversity to gender and ethnicity. Those two are really important, but the diversity of a group of people should not only be visible diversity. I mean, not only, of course, are there many other protected characteristics which ought to be present in the workforce and are sadly far too lacking in presence, not least disability, not least a true gender diversity, the true gender diversity that would be representative of society. But also there are other characteristics which we shouldn't underestimate in terms of the power of a group of people. And one of them that there's a lot of conversation about at the moment is cognitive diversity, socioeconomic diversity. And certainly in a lot of the circles in which I've worked, there has been a really narrow preponderance of a particular socioeconomic background and a particular set of cognitive styles. And, you know, one of the joys for me as I've moved on in my career is actually finding myself in different working environments where, for structural and other reasons, there is a much, much broader variety. And, you know, I celebrate that and I feel energized by it. So, yeah, those are the points that I want to make.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for sharing the quote from the author, the journalist you mentioned, and talking about boardroom accountability. You know, it's only when we get diversity and inclusion, equity, diversity and inclusion onto the boardroom agenda, that's when we can really make an impact. Otherwise, D&I just becomes a bolt-on or something that is done by someone else over there in the organization. And it's so important, you know, if we could have organizations that were designed where the head of ED&I or D&I, whichever acronyms you use in your organization, has a seat at the table with the CEO to drive accountability through the DE&I lens. And I think that is so fundamentally important to drive that change, you know, to be able to go further and faster. Ritika, if I may come over to you.
Thank you. I just love listening to Catherine there, because you're 100% right. Cognitive diversity, equity, and inclusion, all three. So diversity, not just for the sake of diversity. But my favorite quote is, nothing about us without us. That is my absolute favorite, because people sit on boards and make decisions for those that are not in the room. And so I am a big fan of Matthew Syed's Rebel Idea books, which talks about echo chambers, talks about perspective blindness. So I'll just give you a very small example of myself. I've traveled the world on tubes, trains, networks, etc. It wasn't until I had a child in a buggy that I realized that lifts were missing and ramps were missing. It wasn't that I was deliberately, it was perspective blindness. And restrooms are being designed in malls and they are thinking about equity. So half of the restroom space for men and half for women, that's not really equitable, because women need more space in the washrooms. They're pregnant, the children go with them, whatever that might be. It's not, unless you have the perspective from different people, you don't even know what you don't know. So nothing about us without us. And that really is where, you know, the biases will break, the perspectives will come in. And the biggest fact for me there is you can tick as many boxes on diversity as an organization. So I'm on the strategic board with the British Transport Police, and hats off to them for ensuring that there is an advisory board that informs the board and challenges them on the policies and procedures. My first question was, I don't see any diversity on the BTP board. What are we doing? How are you serving the community, the staff, when you don't even understand their perspective? So really, I think it's challenging, and you know, making a way into organizations that you can be, and this is where the position of privilege, where you have a seat on the table and have been given that voice to challenge what works, what doesn't. So really, I think, in a nutshell, nothing about us without us, along with those that are on the table, us, need to be given the platform of psychological safety and belonging to really be able to bring their whole self to work. And then the innovation will come, and then the numbers will come, and then the feel-good factor will come, and everything else that works for an organization will come.
Thank you, Ritika. I love that quote, nothing about us without us, by Meeta Malik. So thank you for sharing that. Andrea, are there any comments, questions for Catherine, Ritika this morning?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of comments that have come through, actually, just kind of relating to what Catherine and Ritika have been talking about. So I'm just looking through the chat box now. And just a few things about when we were talking about being your authentic self. Ranu, if you can't be your authentic self, then you're setting yourself up for failure. Your mental health or confidence will, you know, severely suffer too. Some great comments. I mean, there's massive paragraphs that are actually coming through the chat box. So ladies, feel free to read through them when you have a second. There was a couple of things that came through from the start. just talking about the skills. So it's really helpful advice. I think it was when Catherine was chatting, really helpful advice on skills and how they can be applicable in different areas. That was from Lucy. Transferable skills. This is from Dawn. I've recently changed from a comms profession to a more business development policy role. Fascinating comments and insights from Ritika. Such a shame that there isn't more men on this meeting hearing about what you were talking about earlier, which is what I noticed as well. If you were to look through the participant list there, I can see that there's more messages come through. Yeah, we'll be sharing. Yeah, we'll be sharing the recording and whatnot after. That's absolutely fine. Again, what you were talking about, Ritika, earlier, very true. How many of us got stuck in a tiny toilet cubicle with a baby bump? When you were talking about access, sorry, it was you, Ritika? Accessibility. Some more messages here. Ritika, would you mind sharing contact details for your coach? Please feel free to use the chat box there, Ritika, to put any of your, you're on it, fantastic, LinkedIn. Really lots of comments actually and experiences that have come through from the participants. What I would quite like to ask though, obviously this is, in contribution for International Women's Day itself. Catherine and Ritika, what does International Women's Day mean to you?
If I may go first then, well, what it means is, like anything else, I'm going to be a bit of a narcissist and grump on this one, which is really there shouldn't be one day that celebrates whether that's motherhood or whether that's womanhood or whether that's fatherhood or whether that's whateverhood. We need to be celebrated. But what I also, on the flip side, really like about having a day like that, and especially when it ties into very powerful topics like breaking the bias, it's the stories that are coming from that as a platform, the men that are actually talk about allyship, that are having that sign on all social media posts and how they're supporting. I think it's an opportunity for leaders to show that they care, that they are invested. But really it needs to go beyond that one day. It needs to show in that action. So, within the CQ framework, we talk about the drive, the motivation for doing the work, for gender parity or whatever, diversity, inclusion, equity efforts the organization is looking at. It's going that step ahead and looking at what's the action. And that action, like anything else, whether that's Black Lives Matter, whether that's Black History Month, it needs to be, it needs to go beyond that. There was a quote I read that made me really laugh, that Black speakers don't turn into squirrels for the rest of the year outside Black History Month, right? So it's a matter of celebrating throughout the year, but let's use this one day as an opportunity to amplify those voices and get them heard.
And it is about making it the every day, isn't it, as opposed to just the one day in the year. Thank you, Ritika.
Yeah, I think for me, it's an important opportunity, to everything that Andrea said at the beginning of the chat, to celebrate those who went before us, and frankly those for whom it was much more of an uphill struggle even than for us. Certainly when we're looking back to the women in New York and the women in St. Petersburg in 1917, and of course, the inspirational women who are facing devastation in Ukraine, as Meenakshi mentioned at the beginning. So it's a moment for reflection, and it's a moment for the space to assess where you are in your career and in your personal life in terms of comparisons with others, but more importantly, in terms with what you might hope your aspirations are. And if you identify, as Ritika mentioned, that actually through that reflection, you are nowhere near and not on a journey towards the thing that you would like to be and the thing that you would like to do, that's the point at which it is necessary to say, well, how am I going to get there? And what is it that I need either to upskill myself or or simply in order better to have the confidence that I can go for something, to give myself the opportunity of getting to what is my dream, my dream and my inspiration. So I think it's important for that reason. For me, certainly for the last 10 or so years when I've been involved in International Women's Day, it's a real opportunity to do just a little bit of paying back to all of those who inspired me and who guided me. And if I can do a tiny bit to encourage others, as I like to believe that I do in all the different roles that I have in my portfolio, if I can do something to encourage others and to make them believe that they have everything that they need from the point of view of going for their goal, then that's very worthwhile for me, and it feels that it's the right kind of paying back. And the last thing that I think is really important about International Women's Day is that it's an encouragement to call out bias. And I don't mean necessarily to do that in a very militant, hostile or confrontational way. There will be times that it's necessary to do it in a very confrontational way. But more often than not, and more successfully than not, in my experience, it can be a very quiet, dignified, rational calling out, which actually is most effective in getting the perpetrators of the biases to think again and to think twice before they make the same assumptions or before they make the same decisions. I'll just give one tiny example. I was 23 when I was made a producer inside the BBC. And at the time that I was made a producer on a particular documentary strand, I don't know whether anyone will remember it, called Everyman, wonderful documentary strand. There was another, one of my colleagues, a man, also made a producer at that time, and he and I had always been friends. We'd actually gone in as graduate trainee producers together, so I knew exactly what his background was, he knew what mine was. We both knew that we had pretty much identical experience, and he's a terrific guy, but one of his habits was to be very messy and to leave lots of things lying around, including his payslips. So there was one day early in my career as a producer in the BBC when I happened to see his payslip, and I happened to see that he was being paid a large sum more than I was. So I marched into the head of the department and I'd say, it's come to my notice that somebody who was made a producer at exactly the same time as me, with exactly the same experience, is being paid more than I am. And immediately there was bluster, and we don't discuss salaries of other individuals. I said, I'm not asking you to discuss salaries of other individuals. I'm simply pointing out that it's come to my attention that there is a disparity that should not be the case. I'd like you to look into it, and I'd like you to do something about it, please. And nothing more was said, but the next month my salary was raised to exactly what his was. So, that's a tiny example. But if International Women's Day empowers any others to feel that they can call out things which they know to be wrong, which they know to be belittling, or which they know to be unfair, then that is collectively how we will create the next generation who don't have to think about biases and stereotypes, because they simply won't exist.
Absolutely. I mean, just even reading the chat box there whilst you were speaking, Catherine, there's a few people that relate to that, and I'll just read some of them off. Natasha says, have you any tips on best ways to respond to comments from older males in a business of "you're such a helpful young lady," etc.? Funny tips for the bonus. Another comment here that's just came through. I was asked once by an older male manager if I was in a meeting to take minutes. I responded yes, and also to make coffee and bring you lunch. Yeah, I mean, there's so many comments that are just relating to what you've just said there, Catherine. And yeah, fantastic. Well done, you. Well done, your 23-year-old self.
Thank you, Catherine and Ritika. And I think, you know, just to spend the last couple of minutes of this hour that we've had together is, in closing, do you both have a thought, a question, a challenge to leave our delegates with today?
I think really listening to the conversation today and reading some of the chat, it is hard. The questions asked around, you know, those microaggressions really in the workplace. We've been there. I've been there, and as much as I preach now about stand up for yourself, it's so hard when you feel that your job depends on this manager you work with, and how you react might put your job at jeopardy. And so it's very hard in that real world situation to be confident and stand up for what you think is wrong. But I would urge you to step outside the box. And this is what has given me courage, is that I don't do this for me anymore. I do it for my children. I do it for the next generation, as Catherine just talked about. I think that gives me so much courage, because this generational trauma, as they call it, or the cycle of bias needs to break, and you need to have the courage to help break it by not just standing up for yourselves because you're doing it for yourselves, but you're doing it for the next generation. So hopefully that gives the courage to spur on and call out those microaggressions and use humor or call it straight out, and have allies in the workplace and beyond that will support you in your journey towards standing up for yourself.
Thank you, Ritika. Catherine?
Yeah, I think a couple of lessons that I'd share, which certainly I didn't realise early enough in my career, is to get yourself out of any situation which is negative. Get yourself out of any situation which is negative very fast. I think looking back, there were a couple of occasions when I was working for someone who didn't value me or who undermined me. And instead of thinking, you know, this is a toxic situation, I just need to move out of it and move elsewhere, I thought I can prove my worth, and you know, I can turn this relationship round. And that was a mistake. So I think that would be a wise counsel, because staying in such an imbalanced relationship and such a negative relationship actually saps your self-confidence. And, you know, there are too many things sapping self-confidence in life, so don't let the workplace be one of them. The other thing that I would say is know your own boundaries. There is nothing the matter with saying, actually, degree of self-knowledge. I know that I am happier in, for example, a supportive role than I would be in a leadership role, or I'm happier as a deputy rather than as a chair or a chief exec. And that brings out my particular talents rather more than if I were in a situation which I would find too stressful and too pressurized. There's nothing the matter with that. So just, you know, constantly reevaluate, have a lot of self-insight and self-reflection, and find out what really fulfills you, but also makes you happy in terms of levels of stress and anxiety. And the third thing that I would say regarding stereotypes is that just be wary about classifying all stereotypes as negative. And the reason I said that is because certainly as a television producer, and certainly as a young television producer, there were definitely times when gender stereotype worked to my advantage. And this is something that I've heard Lise Doucette, the international editor for the BBC, also talk about apropos of her sensational reporting in the Middle East. i.e. that there can be times when I would get access and trust precisely because I was a woman and a young woman, and therefore perceived to be more trustworthy, less threatening, more sincere, less threatening. Now, you know, you could say, well, actually, that's a ridiculous stereotype. Certainly, there are many men who are entirely trustworthy and ought to be given the same benefit of the doubt. In one sense, yes, but in another sense, actually, you know, there are so many, for us, there are so many downsides of stereotypes, that where there are stereotypes which we can use to our advantage for a morally good end, i.e. to get the access to something which the world ought to know about, you know, in terms of journalism, that's a good thing. So just be wary about throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Thank you so much, Ritika and Catherine, for spending the hour with us celebrating International Women's Day. It's been great to be in conversation with you both, you know, sharing examples of how you're breaking biases, how you are, you know, leading this new era of leadership. If I may now hand back over to Andrea in closing.
Yeah, thank you so much for really inspiring and honest discussions. It's been a fantastic hour. I just want to let everyone know about the next webinar that we're actually running this month. I'm just going to put that on the screen there. So next webinar will be with our trainer Katie Day and Dr. Roger Prentice on making the most of midlife talent. Keep great people and become an employer of choice, and that will be at 10:30 a.m. on the 22nd of March, and it's completely free. If you would like to register for that webinar, please do send me an email or visit our website and go to the webinar page and you can register on there. I can see there's so many comments coming through the chat box. Just, you know, thanking the panel, obviously, and yourself, Meenakshi. Again, just want to say thank you, Catherine, thank you, Ritika and Meenakshi, for today's session. This session has been recorded. We will be sending this out to everyone in due course. But again, if you have any questions about the webinar itself or any of our speakers, please feel free to get in touch. And yeah, we hope to see you very soon. Happy International Women's Day, everybody. And again, yeah, I don't know if you've got any last remaining comments, ladies, for the audience.
Enjoy the day. Enjoy International Women's Day.
And keep celebrating and educating yourself.
Every day is celebrating.